This is
Hi.
Jessica Pettitt, and today we are talking about Chapter 14, Department of Health and Human Services. And I am super grateful to be able to engage in this conversation with the one and only Sarah Kerr, who is actually legitimately a friend of mine that lives in my small town that I never get to see because she's really busy and I'm really busy. So we get to see each other on Zoom, even though we are like 12 miles away from each other. Sarah, thank you for doing this. Is there
Yeah.
anything burning issue that you need to say about your review of the DHHS chapter to get us started?
Whew. I think that wow.
Wow, that is
Wow.
an excellent place to
Yeah,
start.
there's so much to unpack. I actually was really surprised at how approachable it was to read.
Mhm.
And shocked, not shocked by what's in there. So can't wait to talk about it with you.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's back up just a second for like the average human. There's a very good chance that you might be more familiar with the Department of Humans Health and Human Services, DHHS, than you are like the Department of Commerce. At least that's in my case. I was like, oh, I know all about this chapter. Ronk didn't, and like the other chapters, I did not know there's 172,000 things that are inside of DHHS,
Yeah.
of which this chapter states it's only going to prioritize the most important ones. And how it prioritizes the most important ones, it goes over 13 of the 28 different sub departments, but those 13 fit inside of these four main goals, and then we'll just start, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So the four main goals basically are any department that they can first and foremost enshrine anti-abortion policy in every single aspect of every single department's purview. Number two, which for the record, with the Dobbs case, abortion has been overturned. So in some ways, this actually makes sense constitutionally, right? Is that if that's not going to be a thing, then you got to take it out of everywhere it's a thing. So that's kind of the first thing. Second one is weakening Medicare and Medicaid protections under the guise of consumer choice. And consumer choice is kind of hidden inside of Medicare A. Is that what it's called? Medicaid A? Medicare A.
Part A, yeah.
Part A. That's the secret is the you finally get choices that cost money and you get charged for them. Use a biblical definition of marriage. I think it's important to mention that it is a biblical definition, even though we're talking about religious freedom here. Biblical definition of marriage, which means a cisgender man and a cisgender woman who have consensually had sex, except that's not what's articulated, but they are married and they have conceived baby bits, and those
Mhm.
babies make that a family. Biblical definition of marriage and promoting marriage wherever it is
Throughout.
possible
Yep.
must be married. Um, Death, divorce, separation, single parenthood, boyfriends. It even calls out boyfriends as
Yeah.
that's not enough.
Dangerous. Dangerous.
Danger of boyfriends. And then the last one is enshrine a binary definition of sex as the law of the land and label non-binary gender and trans issues as harmful and unacceptable. I had a conversation with my husband the night before last about how I thought it was progressive that they're actually using the words non-binary gender, like somebody gave them an
Yeah.
updated vocabulary list, and I was shot down.
I was like,
Not
what
progressive.
what did he have to say about that?
Yeah, Lauren was like, I will not be giving that progressive. They just updated their vocabulary. But I am also coming from, and Sarah, you're welcome to talk about your background and your consulting business too, but I am also coming from having done this work in the early 2000s up till to now through the Bush years where we were fighting for people to acknowledge that sexual orientation and gender identity were separate different things
Mhm.
and not sex. And so I'm going to stick to my guns. I think it is progressive to have the commas implies there is some intellectual understanding that
Mhm.
somebody somewhere uses sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity as three different things.
So
They
the
don't care. They don't
yeah,
like it.
the language
Go
is
ahead.
progressive, but I mean, it's even more telling then that if there is that level of understanding, and they still give a shit about these people, right? Like,
Yeah.
so like, it's not that they don't understand, it's that they are, yeah, that it's abhorrent to them.
Yeah. Abhorrent, and progressive is a sentence that I would not think would work. Mhm. Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about your background before we get into all the things that they would like to cut, and possibly even like which pieces stood out for you because of your background?
Yeah, yeah. So I picked this chapter because for the last
Glutton
25
for
years,
punishment.
yeah, yes, that and for the last 25 years, I've worked in community health. I've worked for Planned Parenthood. I've worked for community health centers. I've worked in the harm reduction field. So it is what I live and breathe and do every day. And so, yeah, I was interested to see what was in here. I mean, we've already covered what stood out. What stood out is just the like laser focus on
Mm.
anti-abortion, anti-gender affirming care, uh, biblical definition of marriage, and just like I mean, the undertone, I don't even know if you call it an undertone, the overtone is, you know, autocratic Christian theocracy is
Right.
where we're headed.
If I after having read the whole thing, um, if there was a chapter that I cannot emphasize enough that you need to understand what this chapter says, you need to talk about it in your own homes. There may be some things in it that you agree with, and there
Mhm.
may be some things in it that you disagree with. And there mostly is going to be things that you can't believe that this is in there. Partially, I think that's my ignorance of knowing the complications of DHHS. But what strikes me as most powerful about this conversation, and why I'm so grateful to be having it with you, Sarah, is that your average person, and I actually think it's fair to say that you and I are not the average, not just because of our classy hair choices, but because of what we have dedicated our lives to.
Yeah.
There's no way they know this.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a condescending way. Chapter 14, folks. It is many sandwiches, many snacks, lots of beverages, but it's worth it. So,
Yeah, I mean,
where
and they call it out themselves, or Roger, rather, the author of the chapter calls it out that DHHS impacts more Americans than any other department of the government. Like it touches everyone's lives. And so, yeah, read this chapter, everyone.
yeah, I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so I'm going to start somewhere on my notes. You get to start somewhere in your notes. We're just going to go back and forth until we run out of water. Just to remind people that this is the department that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is potentially going to be the nominee for heading up the Department of Health and Human Services. That has a lot of implications, not just for abortion, marriage, trans people, Medicaid, Medicare, Planned Parenthood, etc., but like Head Start. Who needs it? Um, children and families, they're fine, right? Like I'm just summarizing a couple of
Mm-hmm.
pages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, palliative care, assisted suicide, bonkers. It does articulate a couple of times. It articulates that conception is the start of life,
Many
and
times.
yes,
Many
and
times.
natural death is included, but
Uh-huh.
anything beyond natural death is not included, which it does not specify what is natural death until it came out against assisted suicide. And then I was like, I see what you're doing there. Um, where, what,
Well, and just to throw in there, I mean, I think it's important to note that they are proposing that we change the title of Department of
mhm.
Health and Human Services to the Department of Life.
Department of Life, exactly. But whose life?
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone's.
No, no.
No, certainly not everyone's. Okay, where should we start? I'm like trying to figure out in my notes where we should even start. Um,
Gosh.
Day one to natural death. We already talked about that. We already talked about fatherlessness. I'm starting to cross things off. Um, Sex education programs. I was very excited that that got a line, except it is sex education programs that aren't even about abstinence. They are about emphasizing this biblical definition of a family
Yep.
and like the importance of marriage and even relationships, marriage coaching. That's the sex education programs that would begin in high schools.
And the emphasis on fertility awareness based methods.
Oh yeah, tell us what that is, because as a longtime lesbiterian, I was like, is that when you like count moon cycles or
Yeah.
something?
I mean, they don't spell it out in here, but what fertility awareness based methods traditionally are tracking your reproductive cycle using a thermometer to understand when you're ovulating, for people with ovaries and uteruses. um it's the rhythm method, so pulling out. And
Proven to be successful.
what's wild to me about this is that they claim that it is highly effective and that they want to put more dollars towards reinforcing that it's highly effective. Zero citations, zero data. I mean, there's probably 100 citations at the end of this thing, and none of them back. There's so many spots in here where that's why I wrote, "Where's the citation? Where's the citation?" Because they claim a lot of facts without any data.
Yeah, because who needs data when it's their operational facts? The other thing that I remembered was it does also talk about adoption, but then how does adoption fit in to the biblical definition of what is a family? Because that cisgender man and cisgender woman who are married did not conceive that child.
I thought the adoption, I mean, one, I wasn't aware that adoption was under the DHHS umbrella, which it makes sense when you think about it. I thought that section was fascinating because one, I mean, they clearly state like, no one other than heteronormative cisgender man woman can adopt a child. Like
Mhm.
nobody else. And there's a
No gay
lot,
couples, no
no,
single people.
no.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of emphasis on keeping like they use the language, it's so many pages I'm not going to be able to lay my hand on the quote, but it's something like children's right to be reared by their
Yeah.
biological mother and father.
Oh,
And
yeah. That's written down
so
here. Mhm.
yeah, there's this like almost overemphasis. And then there's like a one liner of like, but if a court finds that the parents are beating the shit out of the child, that then they can be adopted. So I think that's the case for when another heteronormative cisgender man and woman can adopt a child, is when the actual parents are severely abusing them.
But during foster care, priority will always be given to the birth parents, regardless,
Yeah.
because of that importance. I wrote that quote down somewhere, and I have so many notes I can't even find it. But a children have a right to be raised by the parents that they were conceived with, or something like that. Because conception was in that sentence too. Speaking of key sentences, because I found this quote, obviously this chapter does talk about stuff more than abortion and euthanasia, but it clearly simply articulates abortion is not healthcare.
Many times.
Euthanasia is not healthcare. And again, with the facts that they're operating with, I this is my attempt to be charitable. If Roe v. Wade was disturbingly terrible as an expansion of how healthcare was going to work. And you've been waiting for 50 years for Dobbs to be able to declare that this is not healthcare is probably a long awaited, maybe even liberating feeling. And what was fascinating, again, back to no citations and facts, was what I found to be pretty gruesome details that also seem not at all factual about what happens with an abortion, what
Yes.
happens with stem cell research, what
Yes.
happens with baby body parts.
Yeah.
Like, trigger warning, these things are articulated so specifically and seem so outlandish. How would we know about that, and why would we need to talk about that if none of it is healthcare anyway?
Right. Well, and
Ugh.
it's a master class in, using language to their advantage to, paint a picture. There's a very telling description uh of chemical abortion. So abortion pill.
Yeah,
Um
which is also mentioned, right?
right, yeah. And I mean basically I think the line ends and then the baby's born in the toilet, or
Right.
something like that. It's um it's just
Yeah.
and there's I mean they refer to in here of this epidemic of uh, babies surviving abortion. And I was like,
Right.
what is this? What are
Babies
you even
born
talking?
after an abortion. Right.
Yeah. And that the hospitals are just letting these babies die. And, I don't even know what they're talking about, honestly.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna on that note, there is a court case, and I read it because I was like, I'm sorry, what? And I'm not gonna lie, it had me thinking for a couple of days, and now I'm remembering it, so I'll be thinking again for another day. So my understanding of the court case, it's Bowen versus American Hospital Association, and the equivalent of our side lost the court case. And the premise was that the baby that was born was so badly disabled, or I don't, I think they actually used the word deformed in the court reading, with Down syndrome plus many other born disabilities, that life-saving surgeries were not given to the newborn, and that choice was made by medical staff without a conversation or consent of the parents.
Mm,
And the hospital system won because, I'm sorry, the hospital system lost. The parents won because on the basis of discrimination of disability.
uh-huh.
And that this is the argument. If a baby had been born healthy and needed those life saving surgeries, or at least healthier, they would have gotten them.
Right.
Um, Now I can totally see doing this without talking to the parent. That seems weird, right? But like intersex surgeries are done all the time without talking to the parent. So I'm assuming that that's kind of where that was
That's
heading.
coming from. Interesting. Okay.
But wow. But the drum beat, I don't want to lose track of this, even though I'm trying to be charitable. Here's some more little key phrases I wrote down. Overconsumption of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know very many people who feel like they are probably over consuming healthcare. But that evidently we're trying to prevent the overconsumption of healthcare. Abortion tourism,
Oh gosh, yes.
right? Like, I mean, I can't think of anything else more fun to do over spring break. Um,
Well, so let's talk about that for just a second, because I
yeah.
think that's an interesting example of where there's a lot of talk about states' rights, right? And
Hmm.
I imagine that that's having not read anything but this chapter, you can tell me if that's a theme that permeates the entire thing. Um,
Inconsistent theme, probably, but let's see what you're
okay.
going to say.
Well, I just find it interesting. So there's this states' right, states' right, states' right, but then at the same time, if there's a disagreement with what they think the state's going to do, aka California, who is very specifically even called out, California's called out here in this
Very
chapter,
much so.
um, then we're going to work all around the edges to dismantle what they might possibly do to.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna defund abortion coverage in Medicaid. There'll be penalties if California uses the 115 waiver in a certain way. So there's all this like maneuvering. So like it's a facade of states' rights. It's
It's states' rights if you agree with us. If you,
yes, exactly. If you were
right.
in alignment with
Yeah.
Christian
Part of the reason
nationalism.
I think, I'm going to claim Stroganoff brain. I think it's this chapter, but California gets called out a lot, right? And we both live in California. What gets specified about California, I think this might be in the EPA chapter, but that California has a waiver and gets to do its own little thing.
Mm-hmm.
But doing its own little thing is now setting the standard for other states to do it, and it's not the federal government. So there's I'm not going to call it a baseline. I'm going to call it like an occasional appearance of a trumpet of what the difference between guidance and a law is.
Uh-huh.
But it also very much specifies, and Congress, are you listening? Congress is supposed to be writing the laws, not waiting for the Supreme Court to interpret what is or isn't still the law. And so it's mandating three distinct branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial, and they are supposed to challenge and disagree with each other. Also, be, quote, nonpartisan, loyal to the president's agenda civil servants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
None of those words mean those things. Which is why I think some of the words I'm quoting or what I wrote down in this chapter is so shocking, because they're so specific. And some of the contradictions, like, for example, kind of what you were talking about too, is if you can alter, abortion clinics have to have access to emergency rooms or hospitals. And if the clinic doesn't have that, it has to shut down. So you haven't actually prevented abortions in a law. You have made it so that that place can't operate because of something else, some other business requirement, right?
Right.
By kind of slowly dismantling from the outside instead of from the inside. To be able to do that, unless you agree with this agenda, and then all of those restrictions should go away inside of the particular state rights. There's so many of them. I just found another one. I'm sorry to gasp. It actually articulates best disinfectant, light.
Yes, yes, I like underlined that one.
Like, so bonus to this chapter, they used spell check and an editor. That is not consistent in all of the chapters. But that sentence made it in. The best disinfectant is light. Well, I am sorry about my overconsumption of healthcare by exiting the building. What is happening? Also, scrapping dispute resolution, because if we got rid of dispute resolution, then all medical facilities would have to just be truthful about what they're doing. Truth in advertisement. The consumer, this is like pro business, the consumer would win. The only problem with that, similar to like affirmative action, civil rights, is that it would be great not to need them. But we do because people suck.
Yeah, and I mean that whole premise leaves the consumer to their own devices. And like, how many people have the experience, the time, the money to, resolve a dispute with their healthcare provider without someone supporting them?
Right.
Bonkers to me.
And most of those decisions are being made in duress or emergency because there's no mention of preventative health care.
No.
No. I think it is also interesting. I don't know that they know that this is in there. I'm just going to be honest, but I was surprised by this. But that abortion is anything that is intentionally ending an unborn child's life. Therefore, miscarriage management and ectopic treatments should never be conflated with abortion.
I saw that too.
Anybody want to tell Texas that?
Yeah, yes. We just had a case like that here locally where the Catholic hospital turned someone away who was actively having a miscarriage because there were fetal heart tones and she had to drive herself while hemorrhaging to the other local hospital.
But Sarah, they gave her a bucket and a towel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I thought that too. I was like, interesting.
What is happening? Okay, so then back to pro business. Very big fans of generic drugs.
Yeah.
And it is up to the drug producer to produce their own generic version, because it's good business to make full fee pills and cheaper pills because the business is going to benefit. And then it did say something about the pharmaceutical advertisement. We're one of the few countries, if not the only country, that has so many advertisements about drugs.
That whole section about there's a lot in here about big pharma, and
Mhm.
I will say, as I was reading that section, I was like, yeah, I agree with this. Like, it's not 100% all seemingly nefarious.
Right. See, but this is what's important is that I think that some of the coverage and even like stop the coup summaries that I've been talking about for each of the chapters, it's so easy to get so mad that you also miss like it actually mentions the using the chemical abortions or the day after pills, etc., other processes up to 49 days instead of 70 days. Like to me, that feels like a win that's in there,
Instead of
even
like
though
none.
none, if
Yeah.
none is the answer, why would you have a sentence that says up to 49 days? Now, I've never been pregnant, whew, but I don't know that if you know that you're pregnant within 49 days,
Well, that's the problem. I mean, that was the
better than no days.
regulation. That was the regulation where we started when mifepristone and misoprostol sort of came out and became available. The maximum allowable was 49 days. And so I think what they're saying is that we've lost ground because we've gone up to 70.
Right.
To your
So we
point,
have to go back.
many people don't know that they're pregnant at 49 days.
Right. I mean, there's like whole shows about people who never knew they were pregnant.
Yeah.
Um, Also, there is no more room for 3 parent uh, IVF that involves 3 different parents. I had to Google that because I was like, I thought we were just being like polyamorous, but no. But you take, I'm going to screw this up, so correct me. I think is it the mitochondria that gets taken out of a cell and
Yeah.
replaced with someone else's, and then the actual cell is someone else, and then that person's mitochondria and that person's cell is then implanted in someone else's body. That's
Right.
how you get 3 parents. We're not doing that anymore.
No.
And we're not doing human cloning.
Darn. What was
I,
what was the line about the chimera, the pig chimera or something?
oh, no, I don't remember. I didn't write that down. I just want to point out that as an incredibly progressive pinko commie liberal, even though I was raised in Texas, just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Mhm.
I am a big fan of not cloning humans.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, we haven't so far.
Uh, right, but that would be in like a useless footnote, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we've done that unless we count AI, which is different, probably a different department. Okay. Fun facts, just to do a shout out from another chapter. The census in 2028, one of the suggestions on the department where the census is, which off the top of my head, I can't remember now, but it didn't make any sense that it's in there. I'll see if I can find that. They're shutting down that whole department, whatever it is. What is it? It will come to me. But the census you have to keep. So they're going to move the census over to Department of Health and Human Services because it doesn't have anything else going on once it guts 2/3 of the departments that are in it. And that chapter that I can't remember which one it is, it'll come to me. It specifies that it wants to put the census here because it is helpful for poverty and homelessness. And almost in the language, I almost thought that it was going to get to drug use and addiction issues, but no, that is the closest it came in my mind. Where like I bet it was in the paragraph and it got edited out, talking about intravenous drugs, homelessness, fentanyl got a mention, of course. But that the census is going to become the DHHS's responsibility to be able to project poverty and homelessness
Hmm.
with with you know what the antidote to poverty and homelessness is?
God.
Biblical marriage.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Right, biblical marriage. I was waiting for biblical marriage to be how to become sober. Like that was the tone that was in the
Mhm.
shout out. That was
Well,
not the case.
Speaking of drug use, I will say that I was really surprised to not see any references in the DHHS chapter about harm reduction, syringe exchange, medication assisted treatment. Like I nothing.
Nothing, not important.
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
Fascinating. And I was, I part of my day job is I oversee a Ryan White funded HIV primary care program.
Mhm.
Ryan White being the federal funding that funds care for folks living with HIV and AIDS. And there's been a lot of fear in the HIV/AIDS Bureau at the federal level that what's going to happen. The only mention of Ryan White in this 40 pages is that they can no longer support gender affirming care.
Right. I did notice that one little line. I just crossed that off. And of all of the services, the only thing that my understanding is that federal grant, which often does not even involve gender affirming care, right? I mean, I'm assuming the reason why it got a shout out is the assumption that everybody is gay, and then now we slippery slope to gender affirming care.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And it reads that way, like, oh, don't forget this post-it note, stick it in there. Um, there is, let's go back to some interesting, possibly progressive language that maybe is also an abomination still. Um, Legitimizing the role of doulas.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Eh,
Yeah. Yeah. I thought
that
that
was
I put a bunch of stars by that and I was like, I agree.
huh? Childcare funding. So anybody who's interested in universal health care or universal childcare, they agree you need childcare funding, but it should only be in
In
home.
home. In home. And axe Head
Mhm.
Start while you're at it because that was another one where I wrote citation. Like, where is the citation of all these claims that they're making that Head Start is ruinous to children?
Right.
Because
And
the data I'm aware of says the opposite.
right, because that's actual data. Um, Inside Indian Health Services, the only mention in the entire book, vision care. Okay, good to know. No dental care. There's no dental care anywhere. That somehow connects into rural health. The Surgeon General is inside of the DHHS, right? So
Yeah.
that's important. She's floating around in there. Oh, here's the HIV comment. Um,
They had recommendations about the Surgeon General and like their title and the reporting structure. They want it to be, I mean, I don't know enough about the Office of the Surgeon General
Dr. Jeanette Neshwat.
um but the line I remember is that they're encouraging the Office of the Surgeon General to become even more like the structure of the military. I mean, it's already based
Yes.
on the structure of the military, right? But they want it even more so like the military.
The current nominee as well. I don't know that she has not been approved yet, but also has her own line of nutritional supplements.
Oh, good.
So maybe those will become federally mandated, except state rights. That's the other thing is there's a counterbalance of what is federally mandated and what should be up to the states, but only the states that agree with this dogma. Um, okay, here's one. This one I'm still thinking about, and it's still getting me. Condoms are not women's health.
No.
All right, so I'm gonna give them one go fish card, and that is they don't believe trans women are women, right? So some women have penises and might need a condom. They are not on that boat, so I'm just gonna give them that Uno card off. We're not talking about women who may or may not also use condoms on their own bodies.
Okay.
Okay. You can also use a condom for a lot of other things, dental dams, things like that. They don't, they're not that into lesbian sex health. So they're going to get an extra bonus Go Fish card. How? Please explain to me how a condom, which could prevent me becoming pregnant or could prevent me from having an STI, that I am now in charge of whether I get pregnant because someone who has a penis is obviously not in charge because they have the rhythm method. How are condoms not part of women's health care? Explain.
I, I wish I could. I mean, the
No,
if
I
we go
don't know.
back, if we I don't know, and if we go back to the biblical definition of marriage, pretty sure in that definition, woman is subservient to the man, and so therefore she doesn't get to give him a condom.
I don't even know what to say. I
That's
think
my
this is
like,
as close to speechless as I'm getting. There is a shout out to family caregivers. I feel like this is usually used as the sandwich generation, is people who are taking care of their own children and their own parents inside the same home. Um, that is biblical definition of marriage by two generations in the same home.
you know what that section too though there's a nod to these family caregivers, but there's also a dig at but they can't be too focused on um like equity and gender affirming something. I'm trying to see if I can find it.
I think it might be conflated with the in-home childcare because women aren't supposed to work.
Ah,
Because it also doesn't deem child rearing or taking care of home as any emotional labor or work. I just realized you're wearing pickle earrings. Thanks for being distracting. Um, Sarah Kerr. Um, okay, so just to be clear, we've talked about the surgeon dinner, we've talked about the Food and Drug Administration, health resources and services, obviously the Office of Secretary of the DHHS itself, Indian Health Services, the National Institute of Health, the Office of Civil Rights, like all of them, is just going to go away. Just get rid of that.
yeah.
Global Affairs, the Inspector General, uh, Medicare, Hearing Appeals, General Counsel. There's a there should be a shout out to substance and mental health because it's substance abuse and mental health is a single categories conflated together, not even mentioned.
No.
Okay, so now we have gotten up to we did Medicare and Medicaid. Now we are at Center for Disease Control. The CDC and the FDA are all in the DHHS. So then that is what takes us down a very upset need a therapy appointment
Yes.
around vaccinations and
Uh-huh.
mask mandates because people are in their feelings. I will say what I learned is I did not realize or think about one of the many reasons that people did not want to be vaccinated was that, according to them, there's no footnotes. The science used to develop the COVID vaccine used baby body parts.
Right. I didn't know that either. And I have not fact checked that.
I attempted to fact check that and was unable to find even false generated factoids about that. But if I want to be respectful of people's religious beliefs
mhm.
and I am being mandated to take a vaccine that does that, that sucks.
Agree. And they mention they
I'm
say
trying. Do you see the
no, it's
trying
good.
that's
It's
happening?
good. No, I agree with you. And they say that there's a vaccine available from Japan that doesn't have the ingredient that they morally object to, but that the NIH or the CDC was blocking its importation. Again, I have not been able to fact check that.
Hmm.
But
The blocking of the importation will send you, don't go there, but it'll send you down a rabbit hole of how Fauci was making money off of the Moderna vaccine.
yeah, he wasn't. Like, I did spend some time in that rabbit hole.
For the
Um,
benefit of the three people who watch this video, I also did. And I just want to state that how science sometimes works is they share information so that other people can keep doing more science.
yeah. Yeah. I think what's wild about this whole section, and it's big, like there's a lot of time and effort dedicated to the pandemic response and how messed up it was. And sure, there were lots of missteps and mistakes. And I mean, part of me is just like that is the natural unfolding of a novel pandemic. Like
Right.
we don't know all the answers instantaneously. And yeah, that's frustrating, but like that's what it is. Um
Mm-hmm.
And my concern is that it's being used as sort of ammunition and a case study to dismantle the public health system as we know it, under the guise of individual rights, of choice, of but like, at what point do we also say, like, we live in a society together and we're going to agree to some things to protect one another? Like, that's going out the window with all of this.
I completely agree. I also think it might be important to remember that Donald Trump was president when COVID
Right.
first hit.
Yeah, James pointed that out.
Yeah, so before Biden became president. Now, again, here's an attempt to be charitable. Because of the way Trump, as a leader, as the president, was handling the pandemic, not epidemic, the CDC gave guidance that was accepted and treated as law to a lot of the United States, because the United States wasn't, a lot of places did not feel the advice and leadership and regulations that was coming from the White House was effective or useful, and people didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
In a different chapter, I believe, what we're talking about, declaring emergencies and being able to predict things. It's the chapter of NOAA, isn't this? Both of them, the
They
census,
talk about it in here too.
The census and NOAA are both the Department of Commerce, just for the record.
Oh.
So NOAA's job is to predict and plan for the unplannable, and that's dumb. So then when you get to COVID, I'm paraphrasing. So then when you get to COVID, part of what was frustrating, and you said it perfectly, is that we didn't know when it was going to happen. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know when it was going to be over. So the CDC's job is to determine the start of a pandemic and the end of the pandemic, so that we know what the time frame is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how shit works.
Right.
Like, we didn't know about the mutations. I honestly wonder, and I have gone down way too many rabbit holes of this, but I wonder if when it was stated that, like, we're not sure that masks work, and then the next statement was there was a mask mandate, was that also timed with, like, we don't have enough supplies to tell everybody that a mask mandate is required, so we need to get that to first responders, frontline people first? Like,
100%. Yeah.
You don't know. You're trying to save lives. That's what you're trying to do, not kill people. I have not talked about my own family situation yet on any of these reviews, but I remember, I think we were probably 3 weeks in, and I hadn't been on an airplane, and that is very strange for me. And I called my brother, and my brother was at a football game. And I was like,
huh.
What? I haven't left the building of my home. What? But it is very important to remember, just because we're talking about COVID, not everyone had the same COVID experience.
100%.
Some people worked every single day because they had to. Some people worked every single day because there wasn't actually an illness. And some people never left the building for 2.5 years. Okay. Thank you for letting me do that little shout out. It does specify protect faith-based beliefs, but they have to be biblically based, but it does specify biblically based faith-based beliefs. So it's like almost the door's open, but then it specifies, just kidding, just this one.
Yeah.
Health, marriage, education. We talked about that. The last little note that I have is, this is on the no boyfriends. Boyfriends are dangerous and bad. But the father being present, but the father is also the breadwinner.
Yes. That was very clear. The father's the breadwinner. And there was an interesting line about the role of the mother and the father being distinctly different. The mother was like love and nurturing, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And the dad and the father was protection and discipline. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's not gendered.
Ooh.
So they do understand the concept of gender. Okay. So then Also inside this chapter is something about strategic preparation and response. I think that's the part where it's like it's their responsibility to determine beforehand when a pandemic is going to start and when it's going to end so we can plan accordingly. You know, community living, child and families, conception to natural death is the role, GHHS. I don't drink, and maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That is a very, very big overview of
Yeah,
it, and
and there's so
we
much
didn't
that
even.
we didn't even get to. I
I
want to
know.
say one thing before we wrap, which is
Go,
that
please go, please go.
I want people to look at the section about Medicare and Medicaid, and in
That's what I
California,
was just about to
Medicaid
say.
is
I was like,
California is Medi-Cal.
we didn't spend
But
any
I
time
mean,
on this.
in a like super high level nutshell, they're advocating for basically the complete privatization of Medicare.
Free market.
Free market, the free hand of the market's going to fix everything because we know how well that's worked with private insurance. And all sorts of eligibility requirements being reinstituted for Medicaid. So work requirements.
Not looking at disabilities between certain ages, you're still work able.
Yep. Yep. Asset test. So, we used to have the asset test, and there were so many people that couldn't get access to healthcare because they happened to have inherited a home from their parents. So like people are then faced with a choice of like, I sell my home or I get my cancer treatment, like, so there's some really serious repercussions in the details of the recommendations around Medicare and Medicaid. So check that out.
Thank you very much for saying that. I was just looking through my notes and I was like, we are almost out of time and we didn't even touch about this. And some of that probably is also we are not currently getting Medicaid or Medi-Cal, so
Right.
maybe that's part of the omission. It is an incredibly important part. There is also a huge section about how Planned Parenthood specifically is an ACORN-like organization, which shout out to my Acorn friends. I used to work there. But this is an organization that the banks during COVID encouraged them applying for EDIL loans. Planned Parenthood said there is no way on earth we're going to qualify for EDIL loans. I'm paraphrasing, of course. The bank figured out exactly how each place, because a small business is defined as under 500 people, that you could qualify. They actually applied. They got it pre-approved by the federal government, and that is being targeted as now, in retrospect, by Republicans in Congress because the Planned Parenthood, of all places, received federal funding during COVID. That's a huge chunk of the chapter. There's a lot of juicy and a lot of these little hidden gems. I think we hit most of the quotable quotes, though, if we were to play a game out of this chapter. Okay, so in all semi-seriousness, most random people sitting at dinner, this is going to be overwhelming in 100 places, and it is literally a terrifying chapter if you care about people's lives.
Yeah.
It is terrifying. So the main question that I came up with to discuss, and I'm curious if you have one as well, but in there it states that separate does not equal together. And this came up in reference to Coates, Shaw, Hyde, Weldon amendments and like what can be spent money, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the billing for services and that you should be asking patients to write 2 checks.
Yep.
So that this money is going to this and this money is going primarily to abortion services. And what struck me was I think that this is a good conversation for people to be having, biblical married or not, is that separate but not equal is very different than separate does not mean together.
Mm-hmm.
And what it made me in my brain think of was that I think this is how we got to where we're at politically, is that we focused on separating things. I am no longer talking about billing. I'm talking about identities, teams, family members, political parties, because it is not together and that you can see exactly what's standing. So my challenge to people, your act of resistance is who are you together with?
Mm,
And who are you choosing to be separate from? And is that something you're consciously doing? Is it something you're unconsciously doing? I think that is a good dinner topic. Do
I
you
think that,
have one?
gosh, not better than that. What that
Well,
makes
I
me
mean,
what that makes me think of though is I was scrolling on the old social media the other day, and a good friend of mine had a post and it said something to the effect of 2025 motto, me and mine. And it was just like a knife to the heart. I just thought like, oh, this is someone that I like love and care about, and like that just feels brutal to
yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to check yourself, right? Like we're not I'm certain Sarah is not talking about not advocating for yourself, self-care. Like that's a pretty center part of the way that she lives our life. It shows up in our friendship. But can we be less seagull? Mine. And can we actually
yeah,
like look at what we have, right? Like that we get to gloss over the Medicaid section that is terrifying because that's not relevant. And by the time it is relevant to us, they probably don't even exist anymore.
right.
Right? Like can we sit in what we have instead of looking at what we don't have because we got stuff that other people don't have. And that's where real accomplice work can happen. I think
Yep,
that's a great place to end.
agree. Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks for your wading through this and similarly going down a number of Google rabbit holes. I promise you do not have to read any more of it. Just
Oh,
watch the next
I'm
video.
not done. I'm not done. I'm hooked now.
I'll give you some suggestions if you want, but there's a video for each chapter. They're coming.
All
Okay,
right.
thanks, Sarah.
Bye, Jess.